Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guest. With me today is Sam Ardery, who is a national mediator, trial lawyer, consultant, speaker, and author. He teaches negotiation at Indiana University's Marr School of Law, and is the author of Positively Conflicted: Engaging with Courage, Compassion, and Wisdom in a Combative World. Shannon Lee is CEO coaching chair with Vistage Worldwide Incorporated. She works with organizations and executive teams to improve execution by defining, measuring, and standardizing the leadership behaviors required for businesses to perform well. And David Marlow, also known as the Ikigai Guy and the Versatile Guru, is a coach, speaker, and author who helps people live into their purpose and helps companies bring their purpose to their products and their people. Thank you all for joining me today.
Glad to be
Pleasure.
And here is our topic. An Alaska Airlines customer reported buying a first-class ticket from Costa Rica to Seattle, an 8-hour international flight. Upon arriving at the gate, they were informed that they were being bumped down to economy class to make way for 2 pilots who were traveling to make a connecting flight. After the customer had paid for first class, the airline not only took away the seat, but also the passenger's breakfast, then failed to offer even a drink or special snack. The anticipated luxury flight turned into a cramped, hungry ordeal. Apparently, a pilot shortage has compelled airlines to offer pilots the perk of first-class travel when they deadhead to make connecting flights. But does that justify refusing passengers the seats they've paid for to solve the airline's own logistical problem and personnel problem? And if it does, do the airlines have a responsibility to do more to offset the passengers' inconvenience? The floor is open.
First, I was surprised. I mean, Alaska Airlines is like known for being a great customer-focused airline. I was just shocked that it was them. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been, I'll just say, any other airline. I won't name other airlines, but I was really surprised that, one that's got that reputation would have such an event.
Well, and when we were talking before about kind of the difference between legal and ethical, I think what most of us don't think about when we buy an airline ticket is they're regulated by the common carrier law, which gives them a right to do what they did. That doesn't mean it's right to do what they did. It reminded me of in 2017 when the doctor was trying to get from Chicago to Louisville to see patients, and ultimately United decided they were going to physically drag him off the plane, which created a whole lot of problems in and of itself. But as you posed it, I was thinking about power. I was thinking about commitments. I was thinking about competing commitments. And then I pulled up Alaska Airlines, and this kind of goes to what David said. Alaska Airlines' mission is to create an airline people love by providing an exceptional, safe, and reliable travel experience, often summarized as the most care anywhere. Their core purpose is to connect people and places with care, anchored in a commitment to safety, integrity, and genuine service. And I think, there are plenty of organizations that have mission statements, but then when the rubber hits the road, they default to being transactional or expedient in ways that are inconsistent with what they claim to be.
Yeah, my wife had a disagreement once with the manager of our local grocery store, and was finding her fairly combative. And my wife finally said, "I thought you're the friendliest store in town." And the manager said, "We've changed our tagline."
Try to keep up.
Yeah, they're not consistent with their mission.
There's something for honesty, right?
Yeah.
Shannon, what do you think?
David, I was surprised too, because I've always heard those things about Alaska Airlines as well. And what came up for me when I was thinking about this was the idea of keeping promises. And obviously that falls outside of the legal realm a lot of times, right? There's not that I know of, a legal ramification for breaking a promise per se. But it falls more into that as an ethical principle, right? It might have been legal for this to happen, but were they keeping that promise? Were they keeping that mission statement? Were they true to that? That was the question in my mind around this situation. And then what can we expect as consumers around promise keeping? So that's kind of where my mind started to go when I thought about this issue.
I was trying to look for the backstory, which, if I interpreted correctly, and apparently, especially during and after COVID, there's been a pilot shortage. And in order to keep pilots, the airlines have to give them more. So when pilots are in the situation where they have to take flights to connect, I mean, I can understand they're used to sitting in the cockpit, which I'm sure is very nice. And to be put back in economy is not as nice. So to negotiate this sort of a privilege that they have, and I don't see any reason to begrudge them that. But if you have a situation where there are open first class seats, fine, give them to the pilots. Now you're bumping out a passenger, but I can at least understand the airline's dilemma. We need to do this for the pilots, or we're not going to have pilots, in which case we won't have an airline. On the other hand, we made a commitment to our passengers. So if we assume that the airlines are sort of backed into a corner where they have to do this to keep their pilots, then what becomes the sort of ethical obligation to the passenger that they have to bump?
Yeah. Well, and are they arguing too that, I mean, there are other passengers impacted, right? If those pilots don't get there and they're contractually obligated to give them those first class seats, if they don't get there, then a whole plane full of people won't be
right
getting a flight.
That's happened to me before, actually, where they couldn't get the pilots, and the pilots that were on the plane were out of time at the end of the evening. We had to get off the plane, spend the night in a city we didn't want to be in that night, and instead of going home. And so, yeah, you're right, David. The impact could be, instead of a few people, it could be dozens, if not, well over 100 people, depending on, not that there'd be 100 pilots, but as far as a whole flight being impacted or more.
Well, and I think it really kind of goes to your question at the beginning, at least, that what you put on LinkedIn, even. Can we use the greater good as an excuse to exempt ourselves from personal responsibility? I think that's an easy answer, no. I think that the harder answer is when you've got competing commitments and you're going to have to break one, what do you do to make amends? What's a real apology look like? And it does, if you can't replace it, I mean, they can't fly the same time first class to get where they're going. If we decide that the duty to the pilots is supreme over the other one, then what recompense do you make to those passengers? And I think David was alluding to this. So if you've got those first class passengers go back to coach, does somebody from coach get bumped? And if the pilots aren't on the plane, does a whole plane load of people not get where they're going? And most of us care mostly when our ox is gored, not when somebody else's is. But I think and all of us seem to have expressed some surprise that this was Alaska Airlines. But I think things like this are also predictable, and having some method of dealing with it that's front facing with those passengers, that's a full-throated apology. And the airline eats some money. They put them up in a luxury hotel and fly them first class. I mean, I was thinking extremes, what they could hire a private plane to get their pilots there. Probably, I looked up what it would probably cost, about $50,000 to get 2 pilots on a private plane from Costa Rica to Seattle. Or they could have flown the other people there that way. So there are a lot of options for them. They seem to have chosen the worst of that which was available.
Yeah. And doesn't it seem like, and see what you two guys think, if they had just even been kind to her and given her a breakfast, she might have been okay, might have understood. But it was like, yeah, we're not only going to do this, but we're going to rub salt in the wound and not give you your breakfast and not let you purchase a snack and all the things. It was like, let's just see what we could do to irritate her a little bit more.
Well, yeah. And oftentimes issues like this, people end up being upset more about how the challenge was handled, the how rather than the what. And I have a really fast story, I promise. My husband and I went on a trip and we showed up and our resort was closed. Our travel agent had no idea. Well, apparently, this was COVID-esque time. Apparently, they failed to contact all the travel agents about this closure. Our travel agent said, "This isn't your fault. We're going to find you another resort." They put us in the nicest room, sent us home on first class tickets. They went over and above to make up for something that was truly out of their control, right? They couldn't open a resort for us that was clearly closed because of health reasons. And so, even though we weren't where we were planning on being, we forgot about it because they did so much to make up for it. And it was probably pennies on the dollar compared to what they could have faced if had they not taken care of it appropriately.
Yeah, it's when you look at it from a corporate point of view, I mean, Sam, you said, $50,000 to put them on a private flight. Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you're a multi-billion-dollar company, just the goodwill. And you mentioned the United case with Dr. David Dow, which I talk about often in my ethics programs. There the story was just it's such a compelling story that the airline offered up to $800 to passengers to take a later flight. Nobody on this flight wanted to do it. So why did the gate agent stop at 800? Because she wasn't authorized to give more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened? Right? Biggest scandal of the year, multi-million dollar lawsuit. The stock value plummeted $1 billion, right? For really an unforced error.
Well, and that, don't you think that gets at another thing that happens a lot of times is the people that are out there interacting with the public, the whoever their supervisors or their corporate policies are, don't give them the authority to solve the problem. I mean, I think about that sometimes with flight issues. I mean, everybody wants the same thing to get where they're going. And then they put these people in charge of talking with 120 people who have just lost the ability to get where they're going, and they do not trust them enough to give them the authority to solve the problem. And then it's, all 120 people then want to be mad at the gate agent. What I try to remember in those circumstances is that gate agent is the only one that can give me what I want. There's not, I can't go buy that someplace else. But it's easy to forget when you're scared and you're tired, and it's a pretty natural response, just not a helpful one. But yeah, the lack of trust of their front-facing people, I think, is a real problem.
And even defining the problem, right? Like if you look at this as a logistical problem, they handled it perfectly. They just
Yeah.
bumped somebody and put the people on there. If you look at it as a human problem, then it's a whole different approach, right? And they didn't solve it. I mean, they solved the logistical problem. Hey, we got to get 2 pilots there to wherever, and we're done. And kind of did one of those.
Yeah,
And
it's almost like the greater good was treated as a blank check. And I think that it kind of like that kind of caused it to be unbalanced in my mind.
yeah, I'll say I like Shibusawa Eiichi was considered the founder of capitalism in Japan. And his mantra, and what most of the great Japanese companies like Toyota and Panasonic and those guys have kind of followed his lead, was you have to have that harmony of profit, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and overall good to society. And if you're not trying to harmonize those elements, then you're going to be out of whack and do something like bump a woman from her first class flight and not give her any compensation. And I just think it's about framing. Why are we here? Why are we here as an airline? And again, if you're just looking at checkboxing logistics, then you're going to make sure that those pilots get on there and she gets bumped back and everything's good. It's that frame of why are we here? What is the purpose of this company? Why do we exist? And how do we bring that harmony to everyone that's involved, the employees, the customers, society as a whole, and still make a profit and stay healthy and be in business?
Well, and in this case, Alaska Airlines had thought about that when they put people in a room to come up with what their mission was and what to do. They just didn't execute it when the time came.
Right.
Well, and I have a friend who's a surgeon, and he says, we almost always survive one mistake. 2 mistakes, there's sometimes a consequence. And 3 mistakes, there's almost always a big consequence. And I was thinking about how this sequence of events happened and where along the way different people could have intervened in some way. But you look at flight attendants and how hard they're working trying to do 1,000 things with people that feel like being loaded into a cattle car. And then you've got the pilot issue there. There's just so many things left. I think people just run out of gas. And so the expedient answer seems okay in the moment until it all blows up and there's a much bigger consequence after the fact.
I think too that speaks to the care and dignity that an organization can give not just to the customers but to their employees. I mean, we're talking about it from a perspective of empowering the employees, but when you feel empowered as an employee, that is a step of care and dignity. And if an employee feels empowered to take an action that's good for the organization without fear of any kind of reprisal, I think that that's very positive experience, which can then translate to a positive experience for the customer. But it seems like, as far as we know about this story, that ethic of care and dignity was not present and not applied to potentially let's say the gate agent or whoever doled out the decision, as well as the customer.
It's what happens when we
And I think people just don't know where to go. They get there and it's just so. I mean, to go back to what David said is that they just went to expedience. I mean, we've solved the logistical problem. Let the chips fall where they may.
That's the overdependence on systems. And it's why I say that compliance can become the enemy of ethics. Because if I check all the boxes, I'm in compliance, or I follow the protocol, I've done my job. And now, again, it's that abdication of responsibility. I've done what I'm supposed to do. It's not working. Somebody else's problem.
Yeah, and that becomes a whole culture of that. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, I think our law firm is not very big. We've got 15 lawyers, but if something needs to be done, we change a light bulb, we clean up a spill on the floor. It doesn't matter whether you're the senior partner or somebody who's just been hired or a staff person. Those are all things that need to be done. If we see them, then we see our job as making sure that that's taken care of. And it also makes us like each other a lot better.
And that's important.
Oh,
yeah. It is. It is. Law firms are not known for that.
Well, having that sense of purpose. I mean, the mission statement thing. I mean, that's all strategery, unless people really believe it or understand it. But so I worked at Northwestern Mutual, which is a great company, a great storied company that really does care about people and life insurance and the value that delivers. And some of the design work that I was leading, we were working in a thing illustriously called death claims. As you can imagine, that's in fact what they do, right? But they were working very hard and with all the right motivations to speed up the process of payment, right? Someone has passed away. We want to make sure you get the money that they set aside for you, a spouse, children, whatever. And so they just kept doing things and focusing on process improvements in the speed category. But when we sit down with clients and ask them about the experience, they would have preferred a little slower pace that didn't put a lot of pressure on them at a very difficult time. And every improvement we were making was putting more and more pressure on these poor people who just lost a loved one. And so again, even with the right intentions and the right motivation, if you don't understand the frame of what is the purpose, what are we here for, and what should we be doing about that, and how can we do that better, you'll make improvements that make it worse for the client. So it's having that sense throughout the organization of why are we even here.
Dan Ariely tells a story about after he was in a terrible fire, and the nurse would come in to change his dressing, and she would slowly peel the bandages off, which was excruciating. And he told her, "We please do it quickly, because it just gets it over with fast." And she wouldn't. She refused. And later on, he asked her about it, and she said, "I just couldn't bring myself to inflict that pain by pulling it off quickly." In her mind, she's being compassionate, but she's not tune in to the reality of the person she's serving. So exactly to your point, David, good intentions are important, but if that's all we have, there's a famous road that is paved with those.
Right. I
Yeah,
think
and
Mark
I mean,
Twain said that, right? Mark Twain said that.
we have to think about impact, right? I mean, there is the letter of the law, so to speak, or their policy. But does that absolve them of harm as a result of that policy? That's really the question. And, you know, if harm has been done, regardless of the intention, what is an organization, whether it's an airline or a small business, what are their responsibilities towards mitigating that harm? How it's handled is very important. And it's a little too easy in my mind to just sit back and say, well, we followed the rules.
Yeah.
Without really thinking about the impact that that has on individuals. And like I said before, giving individuals the autonomy to mitigate for that impact when it's unexpected. I'm sure they didn't intend for this to cause harm for these passengers, but it did. So now what?
I've spent years mediating, and everybody that shows up at my office has had something happen that they didn't expect to happen and they didn't want to happen. It's not 99%, it's 100% of them. And I mean, nobody wants to show up at my office. Something's gone really bad. Self-help has failed. They've hired the lawyers and now they're with me. So it's not, we don't start usually with hugs. But among the work I've done is work involving whether certain claims are actually insured. And I remember and I won't name the company, but this was really an exceptional company. They came in, they talked about it, and the lawyers all talked about, they think they could win and deny coverage. It would require a Supreme Court case on these other things. And the guy who was there, who was the vice president of the company, said, if we have to work so hard that we've got to get the Supreme Court to find an exception for us not to pay, then we're in the wrong. Pay the claim. And that was a very unusual approach. I mean, it was a very unlawyerly approach. He said, we are in the business of insuring people for certain kinds of claims. If there was a little mistake here or there, then we still ought to pay the claim. If somebody defrauded us, then we shouldn't pay the claim. But he said, the lawyers gave him all the reasons in the world that he would have a right to say, take it to the Supreme Court, let's find out we can afford it. But no, if that's really what we have to do, he said, then let's pay this claim and be done.
Yeah.
But that's not why I had a job. Most of the time I had a job because everybody waited for the Supreme Court to figure it out.
I'm wondering what if the empowered, so we're talking about empowering. So let's say the gate agent felt empowered and they instead said, I don't care what the contract says. The pilots are not getting on the plane. You get to keep your seat. One of the pilots can have a seat, but the other one's going to have to wait. I mean, that would be an empowered employee trying to do something nice for the client and the customer. What would that have caused?
Who probably wouldn't have a job the next week.
To put it on the pilots, to say, and not in front of everybody, but to say your contract allows you to do this. If we honor your contract and put you in this first class seat, here's what's going to happen. Now we'll tell you we're going to do that. If unless you decide otherwise, we are going to go ahead and give you those seats. But I want you to know the consequence of you insisting that the contract be honored. Now that creates a lot of other issues and exceptions and things, but it is a fair question to ask.
Yeah, and I mean that's if you have a culture that has the right mindset, then you can go to someone, and you will go to someone, and you'll say, "Listen, we have a problem." It's one of my favorite riffs is the difference between rights and responsibilities. Right? I may have the right to this seat, but I represent this company. And I'm in a situation where by demanding my rights, I'm going to ruin somebody else's trip. That's going to have ripple effects that go out or just the individual involved. And maybe I can stand being a little less comfortable for one trip. And the company said, we'll try to make it up to you at another time in another way. But that's what if I'm looking out for your rights and you're looking out for my rights, we're not going to be having too many arguments.
Well, you also get
one about your story, Sam.
Well, in terms of it being a process issue, you can say, okay, if the pilots are going to bump somebody out of a first class seat, then what we'll do is instead of giving the pilots that seat, we'll give you a $5,000 bonus or something meaningful. Say, okay, this is not consistent with the contract, but what we're going to do is we're going to write you a big check.
Yeah.
It's way less than the $50,000 of the private plane.
Right.
Mhm.
Or
I like,
comp the customer to an extra night in a hotel and put them on the plane
yeah.
tomorrow.
You bet.
It just seems like such a no-brainer to me that they could have done again, even just I think if it were me and they were so obnoxious to me, but they offered me the breakfast instead and said, no, we're gonna make sure you get the breakfast that you ordered and things like that and see what kind of a rebate we can give you on the ticket, something, right? Just anything that said, we get it, this isn't right, and we're going to do what we can to help you. I think I would have been, to Shannon's point, you don't want to yell and scream if somebody's trying to solve the problem.
Yeah,
You're
I
thinking.
thought of at least 6 or 8 different choices. There's probably way more if I gave it even more thought of options that if they felt deputized to make that kind of decision, there are so many things I would never thought about incentivizing the pilots differently. That's a
Yeah,
great
that's a good
idea.
idea.
It doesn't impact the customer at all. But if it has to impact the customer, so many other, you could give them another first class flight at another time and not cap where they go. You could tell them they could go anywhere in the world. That would be so much cheaper than litigation, so much cheaper than so many other choices like flying the pilots private or whatever. That would really go a long way to creating an even more loyal customer, which I think would be the end game in
Well,
something else.
Yeah, so
I
many
was
ethical blunders start with binary thinking.
Mm.
Yeah.
Either we keep the passenger in first class, or we put the pirate in the first class and
Is that
destroy it.
it? Either or, if they had done an okay,
Yes,
we got to
Right.
get the pilots there, and we have to take care of this woman and
they
and
should have
do
taken
right by
improv
her.
classes, right? Yes, and
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Well, and
Exactly.
going to what you were saying, Shannon, in terms of you thought about 6 or 8 different options. If we know this is something that's going to happen on a recurring basis, maybe not every day, but it's going to happen, you could put you and 5 people in a room, say this is going to happen. Let's come up with 10 options on how to deal with, and we'll choose the top one. We're going to keep going in terms of what's consistent with our priorities, and they may get more expensive, but then that gate agent, you say, you've got an authority to do these 10, and I'll bet among those 10, one of them will be accepted, either
Yeah.
by whether it's by the pilot or by the passenger. But and the other thing I was thinking about, because I mean, in my work, everybody always has a limited way they present their problem, and it always involves them with no wrongdoing and the other person having a lot of wrongdoing. I don't. I'd love to know some of the backstory here about more of what happened, and because this is like presented as the passenger's complaint. I don't know what other efforts were made or how it all happened. So I would be curious to hear if that passenger and Alaska Airlines were on a panel someplace, how they would have the conversation about what worked, what failed, what might have been better.
and that's another point. And as we're hearing the passenger side of the story,
Right.
which may be accurate or may be incomplete. Again, but back to that United flight. After that incident, Southwest, which was not the airline involved, they changed their policy to no longer overbook flights. We don't want to put ourselves in this situation where we have to pay off passengers to give the seats. We will risk having a few empty seats on our flights. Uh, and I really admire that,
Yeah, yeah,
especially when it wasn't even their mistake.
exactly.
I have heard that Ritz-Carlton hotels give their employees access to a significant fund that their discretion they can use to solve customer problems. And apparently some really wild stories. One was a newlywed couple. Um, the bride lost her engagement ring, and several of the employees pooled their funds and went and bought her a new ring.
Wow.
Now, one, imagine the customer experience, but two, what does that do for employee morale? And my bosses trust me, and they give me the means and they encourage me to solve problems, to be creative and to take initiative. I mean, are you going to love working in this place? And isn't that itself going to rub off on the customers, even when you're not involved in these types of activities? You're creating an incredibly dynamic and positive culture that everybody wins from. And when you figure out the actual expense that you're going to, I mean, you're gonna have tremendous word of mouth, which is, of course, the best form of advertising.
Well, I was once the beneficiary of the Ritz-Carlton caretaking in a very small way, but
Mm.
I told him I really like to read the Sunday New York Times. I said we don't have newspapers anymore. And one of the people at the desk had heard me say, they didn't follow up on it, had heard me say that. And the next morning on their way into work, they picked up the paper and brought it to my room.
Oh,
There had
nice.
been no more discussion about it. They just heard it. They picked up the paper and brought it to my room. I thought, what a lovely way to pay attention in a small way that really mattered to me.
That's a culture that culture is taught. We
Yeah.
have a restaurant group based out of Ohio. They're in multiple states now, Cameron Mitchell Restaurants, and their employees are empowered the same way. Cameron Mitchell tells a story from a long time ago about someone coming into a restaurant and wanting a chocolate shake, and they didn't have chocolate shakes. And they're like, we have ice cream and we have chocolate sauce, so let's put them together. And that is sort of the ethos by which they operate in all of the Cameron Mitchell restaurants, that basically, if they can do it, if the ingredients are there, they're going to make it for you. And the servers are empowered to make those decisions on the spot with the customers, which is phenomenal. It's the same thing. I love that. And that's why we frequent those restaurants.
Well, Zingerman's, the famous deli in Ann Arbor, does the same thing. They said, here's our practice. Ask the customer what they want, get it for them, and then do something more.
Yeah.
Those are our instructions. The more could be something added given to them. It could be, but anyway, it's just, that's what we do at this place.
And while you're certainly going to have some customers that their main criterion is who's cheapest,
Yeah.
and you need something for those people. But
Oh, yeah.
but plenty of people are willing to pay an extra 10 or 15% more if they're going to get that kind of quality, that kind of attention, that kind of creativity. I used to really enjoy when I had to call Discover credit card. They used to have those cute commercials of the person who calls up, "Hey, are you human?" Um, and it's so nice to not get a recording when you call in. Well, they don't have those commercials anymore because you don't get humans anymore.
Nope.
And I suppose they decided that it just wasn't paying off for them, which I think is sad. Everything is a
Again, though,
business decision.
that's when you get the efficiency thing, right? So, I mean, that's a lot of the work that I've done is around process improvement, and people always want to start with efficiency. And yeah, I worked with a call center director one time. She said, I need you to solve my efficiency problem. We've got to get off the phone, our handle time, the old term for picking up the phone. Nobody has a handle anymore. They were headsets. And I said, well, how do you know that's your problem? She goes, we got to become more efficient. I said, oh, well, I got that solved for you. I would keep a rotary dial phone on my desk, and I pulled it over, and I said, okay, I'll write up a procedure that they just pick up the phone and hang up immediately, and then you've reached max efficiency. I said, well, not quite yet, because there'll still be a couple seconds, to hang up, but eventually they'll quit calling, and you'll be at max efficiency. Have I solved your problem? And she's like, well, no, of course not, right? And that's because you're starting with the efficiency mindset as opposed to, well, why are people calling? And why are they calling more frequently? And this turned out, the short version of the story, it turned out they had to call 3 times to get the correct answer. Well, each time they were calling in, they were 5 minutes. That's 15 minutes. I said, well, what if you spent 10 minutes getting the right answer? You'd double your handle time, but you reduce your overall contact time, and you'd have customer satisfaction and all that kind of thing. And that's what we eventually did. But it's that mindset. It's like, what are you solving first, and what's your focus? And if it's quickly to get those pilots on the plane, or any of those other sort of logistical first or efficiency first focus of that, you're going to do things that are not going to solve every problem or be the best thing for everyone involved.
Or make things worse.
Or make things worse, yeah.
By solving your short-term problems, you're actually sabotaging your long-term goals.
Yeah.
That's why, as you say, grappling with the gray is so important, because this is definitely one of those both and situations. Safety and continuity matters, right? operational issues matter with the airline, for sure. There has to be a utilitarian concern when it comes to pilots and safety on planes, etc. But I don't think that if we just stop there, we're not embracing the both and. The both and has to come in where we think about the impacts of that. Have we kept our promises? Have we honored dignity? Have we done the things that even anecdotally people expect of us, regardless of what the agreement says on the back of the ticket or whatever it is, when you're buying a plane ticket? And really embracing that both and is going to be really important for organizations like this if they're going to have customer loyalty long into the future. That's where my mind goes when I think about these types of situations, is what is if I could put the word win in a circle and get as much inside that circle as I could between customers, the folks who work at the ticket gate, the pilots, the airline itself, how much of a win could we create for everyone in this situation? And in order to do that, we have to look at the both and.
And I think, particularly with airline travel over the last 30 years, as the price has been brought down, more people can fly, and the price of getting more and more people on airlines in an affordable way is more focus on efficiency and other things. Say, that's fine, but if what you want is a cheap ticket, we just can't do that. That both and is beyond anything they even want to consider, particularly if the investment bank that just bought the airline is trying to figure out how soon it gets sold for the stock price to get to a certain place.
Yeah.
Which now is happening with medical and law practices too. So it's not just the airlines.
Yeah, because it worked so well in 2008.
Isn't that the truth?
What were we talking about? There's nothing new under the sun before we started the conversation.
Need a new episode for that one.
Yeah. Or two.
There's not a whole lot of gray there either.
There isn't.
And I think about that employee too. I can't imagine that was fun for them either. And I wonder about all the situations where maybe they got their hand slapped for handling something. And so that just all came together at that moment. Like, no, we can't do anything for you. Get to the back of the plane.
Well, and no matter how much training we give those employees, every one of those is a little trauma for them. When they've got they are the person that's put out there to do the work, and everybody's coming at them. They're not given the tools to do the job. And how do you go home at night and sleep? And how could you ever smile? I mean, it's just the cumulative stacking effect of those minor traumas of people being so angry because they're so afraid is just, golly, how awful for people that have to do that job.
I got curious too in reading this. Was the greater good used after the fact, right, to justify poor planning? I don't know enough about deadheading with pilots to know how far in advance these things are known. But, to the point made earlier by you, Sam, being proactive about this, having a list of things that they're allowed to do, but to afterwards say, well, it's for the greater good. If it was done proactively, if it was done retroactively, it feels a little lazy to just say it's the greater good if that's all the thought that they put into it. And so I got curious about, I don't know what the order was of these things in the thinking, but if that was the case, I'm not so sure about that.
They need to hire you and David to have the meeting, and then they'll never have to mediate with me.
There we go. We'll avoid the whole legal Supreme Court escalation.
And here's the dark side of that, though. It shields the leaders making these decisions of accountability. If they can just sit back and say, well, it's for the greater good, in many ways, what they're doing is they're eliminating the need to be accountable to their customers. And maybe it is because they're only accountable to shareholders. I don't know, but we're normalizing harm when we do this.
Well, and I like that, the greater good connection, because so how are we defining greater good? Is that the health of the company? Is that, if we're talking about health of the company, the employee experience, the customer experience, and society as a whole, if we're adjusting that, then we have to go back to the and, right?
Yep.
Because we're not doing it this way. Clearly, this doesn't take care of the greater good as defined by that. It might by checkboxing the logistical issues, yeah.
Well, and I think there's some, not going to have time to talk about them today, but there's some really interesting power issues here. I mean, if you have, I certainly could argue that Alaska Airlines had the power position here if it's just about getting from one place to another. But with that power position, there was so little thinking in how to use it.
Yeah.
and the negative consequences of using it in the way they did that seemed so thoughtless in so many ways.
Yeah, and I just think about that employee too. I worked at GE and I was in the medical division. I was a senior engineer working in support. So I'm doing like high level calls from hospitals and that kind of thing. And I get this call one day for a GE washing machine. I have no idea how they got like through the trees. This is a long time ago. And I could have just said, well, I'm an engineer on MRIs, but it's like, oh, I have that machine. Let me see what I can do. And so we talked, right? And actually got it working for them. Not that I do a lot of laundry, believe me. You can ask my wife. Um, but still think about that. That was such a fun thing because it was kind of an oddball thing, but also I helped someone and connected with them in a human way. And I mean, that was a fun thing for me as an employee. And I felt like I'm part of GE. This is GE. They see this as the same company. They don't see this as a different division, and I could help them, and why not?
From a
I,
purely efficiency point of view,
Well, yeah, yeah,
that might not have been seen as the ideal use of your time,
yeah.
but I mean that's part of culture.
Mhm.
It's really like picking up a piece of trash off the floor. Well, I'm going to lose 2 seconds of efficiency because I have to pause and reach down and then stop at the wastebasket. But what's contributed, what I'm contributing to the culture and what that just does for my sense of being a partner and being accountable and feeling good about being accountable and solving a problem, even in a small way. It just goes so far in so many different levels.
Yeah, it's the difference between asking, can we do this? Right? Like, which to me is more in corporate speak is more, are we legally able to do this? Right? What's going to keep us out of hot water? If they then ask, okay, if we must do this, how do we do it responsibly? How do we honor everybody involved? And I think making that shift or asking that in addition to can we do it, but how can we do it responsibly if we must do it is the missing link here.
well, and what I think is interesting is um, the harder the problem gets, the more people move toward transaction instead of relationship. They're willing to live in relationship as long as it's easy, and as it gets harder and harder, and the problem becomes more complex, then all of a sudden transaction, which I guess could be another word for efficiency that David used earlier, the transaction seems to be the way, and it just creates pain for everybody. It's just soul sucking for everybody there.
So what lies at the heart of this? Is it just laziness? We just
I think
don't
it's
want to invest the time to think about it.
I think it's fatigue. I think people have so many pressures on them. And there, I was just looking, I think Amazon let 16,000 people go yesterday. I mean, I think about my children who are in their 30s now and their husbands, um, and they move jobs more often than people in my generation did. But it's not just that they're less loyal to the companies are also less loyal to them.
Right.
And it creates this whole circular pattern where why would I bust my butt to do these extra things when they're going to cut me off and leave me with no job and I've got 3 kids at home? I mean, I think I think it's fatigue and people are worn out and they don't, there's an incredible amount of trust lost on all sides.
Yeah, I mean, and that's probably maybe we'll go into that in the next segment.
Huh.
So this is probably a good place to wrap up. But I think we've really, I mean, we've revisited an idea that I think is just so core to ethics, is that it all starts with mindset, and it manifests as culture. When you create a culture where these ethical values are top down, modeled by the leaders, and reflected in the policies, you're going to have more motivated, more creative, more engaged, more fulfilled employees. There's going to be more loyalty in both directions. And you're going to create a much more positive customer experience that's going to end up helping the company succeed in a way that everybody benefits from. And if we're so short-sighted that we're trying to be hyper efficient and always focus on the bottom line, then we're really setting ourselves up for a toxic, or as you say, Sam, a culture of fatigue, where you just don't have the investment from the people in trying to prevent things like this from happening. So thank you. Sam Ardery,
Pleasure.
Shannon Lee, David Marlow. Appreciate your insights, your observations. For those of you who are watching and listening, if you would like to have access to the backstage conversation, which will continue, you can go to my Substack, look into how to become a premium member, get access to those recordings. And if you have a topic you'd like to take up in a future episode, go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea if it's compelling. We'll definitely take it up on a future episode. Until then, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.